welcome Karen Lemke. She'll be talking about the Kellogg Institute, what's new in developmental education.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to see the crowd, and I appreciate the choices that you've made to be here tonight. So today I want to talk a little bit about a program that I participated in this summer called the Kellogg Institute. It's at the National Center for Developmental Education. I want to talk a little bit about what developmental education is, and then talk about how we do developmental education at Adams State, and then some state and national trends related to developmental education. But some basic things. The Kellogg Institute is a month-long certification in best practices in developmental education. I received the Emerging Leader Scholarship to attend Kellogg 2012, and I've been developing this year-long project under the supervision of the director of the National Center for Developmental Education, Hunter Boylan. And at the end of the presentation, if anyone's interested, I can also show you the, what that project looks like. It's a digital storytelling class that high school students at Centennial High School are currently taking with me. I'm co-teaching it with Danny Ladoni. So it has some filmmaking aspects to it, and also college readiness aspects to it as well. And the students are telling their great stories of how they're preparing for college and how they're applying for colleges, applying for scholarships, and we're working on their readiness in reading, writing, and math, and study skills, and some other things related to being prepared to go to college. I'm prepared to give this as a lecture, but I imagine you may have some questions throughout, so we'll see how that goes. But I'm going to start by asking you a question. What year do you think was the first developmental education program offered in the United States? And this is, if you're not familiar with this, this is a Poll Everywhere poll. If you have a cell phone, you can vote right now, and I'm looking at the one person in the audience who's going to vote, and she already knows the answer. So, so okay, a couple of you are pulling out. So if you have a cell phone, you send a text message to that number, and you write your answer. So if you send the message to 22333, and then in the body of the text you write the 584724 number, and then your answer right after that number. And as you submit...
Can we not just say it out loud?
Well, you may say it out loud after people have had an opportunity to vote. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I want you to send it. All three of you. It's my interactive part of the show. The rest. We've done this in our AAA classes, and sometimes it can be sort of dangerous because they'll answer all sorts of things. Like we asked, what did you do this weekend? And we were a little startled by some of the things that people answered. So we're kind of careful the way we use this now in our classes. 1970, 16-something. Okay, good. Okay, thank you for participating. Other guesses? Yes?
Is this a way to respond anonymously so that
yes.
the students are... Oh.
Yeah, so, so one technology that classes are using is a clicker, a little device like this, and all the students in the class have one of these clickers, and you'll see that there are these frequencies for the eye clickers in the classroom, but there are also ways of doing this through cell phones or laptops as well. Okay, well, sometime between 1900 and 1600, okay, those are good enough answers. Marty? 1937, okay, and I'm going to kind of ask you why you thought they might be those numbers. Why 1970? Kills the onion. Sorry, no idea. Okay, that's good. That's good. Why 1937?
Because it was towards the end of the Depression, and during the Depression, people would not have necessarily had the same opportunities to go to school and be ready for college, and maybe a little bit of prep work to go.
Okay, good reasoned ideas about this. Let's let's take a look at what the history of some of these things. And I'm going to talk a little about what is developmental education, and then I'll give you the answer to the question here. Developmental education has been defined in many different ways, but this is one of a couple of the definitions I'll use tonight. It's a continuum of services. Many of you know it as remedial courses, developmental reading, developmental math, developmental writing courses. At Adams State, they are English 090 instead of English 101, so they're at the 90 level. They're not quite college level. But they could also be things like graduate records exam preparation. And even at grad schools, we have developmental programs. One of the other things I've done is I've worked with Regis University's master's degree in their teacher education program, and they have students that they've admitted to the master's program for their teacher education program, but they don't have enough skills with APA writing, and so they take a course with me for developing their manuscript to make sure that they can write their thesis in proper APA format, and that would be considered developmental education as well. So it's really, it can be very, I want you to kind of open your mind to some of these possibilities. It's also based on adult pedagogy, which is also called andragogy, and learning theory. And another way to think about it is supports for underprepared college students who either may not have learned those skills in high school. Some of the high schools, even in rural areas and elsewhere, they may not have someone with a math degree teaching math. And so you might have an English teacher who's teaching math. If that person is teaching algebra, maybe the students taking that class aren't getting all the skills that they need to be successful in algebra, for example. Or they may have learned those skills at one time, but for whatever reason, because of a career change or serving in the military or raising a family, for whatever reason, time has passed and they just don't have that skill anymore. If you ask them to factor a polynomial, they don't remember the vocabulary to do that and they need a refresher. And that's another way that developmental education is used. Principles of developmental education: we accept students where they are and move them as far as they can go. And we also have the assumption that all students have the potential for growth. So what is the difference between remedial education and developmental education? And I will get to the answer about how long we've had remedial or developmental education. Remedial implies that it's reteaching materials and it's a remedy, like medicine for a disease. And that's one paradigm. That's one way to think about applying the tool of developmental education to remediate a student. But another way to think about it is developmental education is focusing on developing skills and taking students, again, from where they are to where they want to be. And it acknowledges that students may not have had the opportunity to learn that material previously. And this gets into some of the social justice issues related and access issues related to developmental education that I think are important for us to talk about as well. So here we have the 1630-something, or the 16-something question. But it's sort of a trick question because the United States wasn't the United States yet in 1600. So.
And it's also not fair because that's the PowerPoint.
And it's not fair because she's in the PowerPoint. From the very start of formal higher education in what was to become the United States, and many people date that to 1636, the founding of Harvard University, Harvard Seminary at the time, there were students who were admitted to go to school there, but they didn't have the skills to be successful. They didn't have Latin teachers in whatever schools that were present in Massachusetts Bay Colony at the time. And so they had to offer Latin tutoring to prepare those students to enter into that schooling. So anytime you have the ideal of higher education being available to people and you have students who want to go to school there and they haven't quite developed the skills that are required for it, we've figured out ways to serve those needs. And that's really the history of developmental education. Now, another date that came up, 1937, and we'll jump into the 30s here in a little bit, with the General College was founded in 1932. The development of all of these programs were related to extending access to students, and then realizing just because people have the opportunity to go to school doesn't mean that they're prepared to be successful in school. And that's where these programs have come to be. In 1862, the Morrill Land Grant Act was passed, and all of these states were able to create Colorado State University and all of the state land grant universities. And that created another situation where you had people being admitted to programs of study, but they may not have had adequate preparation to be successful in it. And so these preparatory programs were developed in the 1860s through the 80s, and by the end of the 1880s, almost all of these colleges had some sort of preparatory program. And that led to the founding of the College Board, which is the ACT achievement test. You may have remembered taking the College Board tests at some point in your young career. And that developed the idea of having entrance exams and measuring the achievement of students to be placed into programs of study. And then, not for almost 25 years, the Ivy League finally got together, and the admissions officers got together and said, well, what are we talking about when we're thinking of people being college ready? And started to discuss college readiness criteria. And then something that happened at the University of Minnesota, they had admitted all of these students to the university, but each program of study within the university had its own criteria. So to get into the School of Architecture, or to get into the School of Business, of Education, of liberal arts, all of those different programs, you needed to have a certain threshold of skill, threshold of achievement. And there were all these kids who'd been admitted but couldn't get into any of those programs. And so they created a general college to prepare students. And much like what we would call first-year programs today, and things like what we have here at Adams State, we have academic achievement strategies, we have our developmental coursework in reading, writing, and math, but getting some foundational skills so that students could develop the skills needed to test into the School of Architecture or wherever they wanted to go. Another milestone was in terms of access and a flood of students entering or wishing to enter higher education, but maybe not having that skill set, came right after World War II, when the GI Bill was passed, which was a reward for people who had served, and continues to be a reward for people who've served in the military service. Suddenly we had all these GIs coming back from World War II wanting to use their GI Bill benefits, and they couldn't test into college. And we're seeing some of that today, that there is a certain number of veterans who are returning from service, and they haven't taken algebra for a long time, and I'm going to make the case tonight that it's very important that we make sure that if we want to have a broad variety of people having access to higher education, we need to have some mechanisms in place to support their success. In 1965, in the mid-60s, we have the civil rights movements happening in terms of access for all sorts of people. And we were admitting students from lower economic backgrounds, and created this Higher Education Act, which was passed, and that helped to create the TRIO programs. We have a couple of TRIO programs here at Adams State. We have Student Support Services, which is a program specifically available to students who are first-generation college students, meaning they're the first in their family to graduate from a four-year institution. And that really encompasses a whole lot of underrepresented groups. You'll see ethnic diversity come through that, socioeconomic diversity come through that. But TRIO programs support three criteria: students who come from low socioeconomic background, students who are first in their family to graduate, to attend college, and students who have a documented disability. And we have Gear Up in the high schools here. We have talent, or we used to have Talent Search, and we have Student Support Services now as some of our TRIO programs. Then This, as a discipline, started to organize itself. The College Reading and Learning Association was founded a few years later. The National Center for Developmental Education and the National Association for Developmental Education formed in the mid-70s. The Kellogg Institute, which was the certification program I went to this summer, founded in 1980. And now a growth of a council of developmental education associations in the mid to late 90s. And more recently, some more attention being paid to students who come from low-income backgrounds. The Lumina Foundation has funded about $100 million to initiatives for achieving the dream, specifically targeting students from low-income backgrounds. About 7 or 8% of students who come from a low-income background end up graduating from college. And that's really, if you think of it in terms of market share, people from more affluent backgrounds, basically everyone who wants to go to college can't. If they have low skills, they have the resources to get private tutoring, a Sylvan learning systems, or some sort of preparation, PSAT and SAT prep programs, Kaplan, those kinds of programs, they can afford to do that. But students who come from lower income backgrounds tend to also come from schools that are under-resourced and have all sorts of other things that make it difficult for them to graduate from college. And so targeting some resources specifically to them happened in the last few years. Yes, Joel?
How did affirmative action fit into all that?
That's a good question. How did affirmative action fit into this timeline?
This started in the 60s or 70s.
Yeah, I don't know the answer specifically to that question, but I'm guessing related to some of these things. It seems like whenever we do extend the, cast a wider net for welcoming students into higher education, we have this transition time of how do we support people who are coming from different cultures, different language groups, different students with disabilities, students, transgender students. I mean, there are all sorts of students who come from these underrepresented populations that have experienced systemic barriers to learning, and then it's someone's job to figure out how to overcome those or remove those. A few years ago, the Gates Foundation launches the Developmental Education Initiative, and they also put some money towards funding programs to support low-income students succeeding in college. And then just a few years ago, the White House Summit on Community Colleges is held, because we're really recognizing that for social mobility and access issues in our country, community colleges and college, Adams State is unique in that we do have a 2-year mission. In addition to being a 4-year college and having graduate programs, we also have a 2-year mission because of our regional isolation, where we can grant associate's degrees. And that also enables us to offer the 90 level and 60 level reading, writing, and math courses here at Adams State. Some other numbers and pieces of information that might be of interest. 70% of universities offer developmental education courses, and this is under debate in a lot of states, and I want to talk about some of the 2 major conversations about whether or not we should be funding developmental education in higher education. There's sort of this pushback of like, well, they should have gotten that in high school, and some states are actually defunding their developmental education programs, and what kinds of consequences that might have. I'll offer some ideas about that a little bit later. All community colleges have some sort of, all community colleges are open access. So anyone who applies to go to a community college, with a few exceptions, will be offered the services to be successful and get into college level reading, writing, and math. That isn't necessarily the case at four-year institutions. 80% of colleges and universities have learning centers, including Adams State. We have, you could say, many learning centers. We have the Student Success Center on the first floor of Nielsen Library. In this building, we have a math lab and a brand new STEM tutoring center that's being developed on the 3rd floor, and that's part of our, STEM is an acronym for science, technology, engineering, and math. And it's sort of a specific target to try to get more students to graduate with degrees in those disciplines. We have a writing studio. We have a couple of different and tutoring in the residence halls, a couple of different places where students can do group learning and tutoring. About 3 million students take developmental courses. Those courses are taught by about 40,000 full-time developmental education faculty and about 60,000 part-time faculty. And at Adams State, we're a little bit lucky that we have some full-time positions. There are some colleges in Colorado that have 90% or more of their faculty who are teaching these courses are part-time, and that creates all sorts of continuity and faculty development and challenges with the quality of teaching that can happen when you don't really invest a lot in your teachers. And these are that first year of their college experience is a vulnerable year. That's the year when students stop out or drop out, and I would argue, ought to be putting good resources towards supporting students in their first year of attempting college. 65% of community college students place, when they take a placement test, they place into a developmental education course, but only about 30 to 40% of those students actually take that course. And I put a star next to that because a little bit later when we talk about some of the criticisms of developmental education, and they talk about students who place into developmental courses having such high failure rates, part of it is that they're kind of going against the professional advice of their advisors to take these courses, and they're not being successful. And so there are complications to these numbers that I want to give you some foundation for understanding. $2 billion is annually spent on developmental education courses, which is a relatively small percentage, less than 2% of the $116 billion total spent for higher education. So when we hear politicians speaking about we really need to cut these programs and it's a big waste of money, well, we spend money on a lot of other programs that are a much bigger piece of the pie, and it's really targeting, and I'll show you which kinds of students kind of get targeted when you cut these programs. And then this statistic came out just last week. 43% of United States college-bound high school seniors are graduating college ready, meaning less than half of the people who plan to go to college, not even all the kids in the high school, so it's less than 43% of all the kids graduating from high school, because some of them choose to go to military service or go directly into the workforce or go to prison or go to all different places. But 43% of the college-bound, the ones who are planning on going to college and have been taking college prep courses presumably, are graduating college ready. So another one of the criticisms we'll talk about a little bit later is we need to send those kids back to the high schools because the high schools aren't doing the job that they were supposed to be doing. Well, we've only really funded the high schools to be graduating about 43% of their students to be successful. If we wanted more of them to be college ready, we would have to fund the high schools at a higher rate. And I'm not sure that that's even what we want to be doing. Maybe, I don't know that anyone is going to make the case that we want 100% of high school seniors to be college ready, and the cost associated with that, because perhaps our workforce doesn't require that. Perhaps our workforce is changing, and we will need to consider some different funding strategies for K-12 education as well. I also wanted to speak a little bit about universal design, because this is a guiding principle in developmental education as well. Universal design is an architectural concept about creating buildings that are accessible to all. This came out of the civil rights movement and people with disabilities making the case that it is a civil rights issue for me not to be able to get in my wheelchair to be able to access the second floor of this building. And so a lot of resources were spent in retrofitting buildings to be accessible not only to people who use wheelchairs, but people with other sorts of disabilities. And when you think about good design, it would be better to plan ahead to make a building as accessible to as many people as possible, and that's where this concept of designing for universal accessibility came into play. And it's less expensive if you think ahead and plan to have curb cuts and ramps and things to support people. And not only do they help people who use wheelchairs, for example, but they help a whole bunch of other people when you have buildings designed with doors that are wide enough for access, or with good design. And so about 15 years ago, universal design for learning, universal design for instruction, universal instructional design, a couple of different names depending on which school it popped up in. Universal design for learning takes that universal design to the classroom in terms of designing curriculum, assessment, pedagogy for accessibility to all. And I would also add to this system design, making sure that everything from the admission process, through advising, through the courses, through all the transitions, through graduation applications, through career preparation, is designed without barriers in place for any particular subset of our population. And that's the big picture that I'm hoping that we can think about tonight. A little bit about myself. My undergraduate degree was in psychology. I was very interested in developmental psychology and the way the mind develops, the way cognition develops and learning. I was also interested in writing instruction. I wanted to teach writing. And at some point I realized that there were people who could benefit from developing these skills, using these skills for the purpose of social justice, to create more equity in our world. And I'm also a fan of good design. And so those are some of the things that I like about developmental education. So I'm coming back to this question. What is developmental education? Is it a department? Is it a discipline? Is it a research area? Is it an idea? Is it a program? And even, is it a social science? My graduate degree is in English. I used SPSS. I did quantitative research in my thesis preparation because I was doing social science research related to this. And we get into these kind of gray areas, and I know we have a couple of grad students in here in our HEAL program who may end up doing a study related to our students. And we talk about, do we need to get institutional review board to review these study findings? It's all of these things. And I think it's also related to the phrase that we use in our stay meetings sometimes, is that we're flying the airplane while we're designing it. And it has this very dynamic sense to it. It's very different from more static academic disciplines. As I said, my other undergrad degree was in English, and I went to University of Northern Colorado, and I studied English there. And English is the kind of discipline where when you take your comprehensive exams, you have British Lit, and you're going to be studying like Shakespeare and a bunch of those guys. You'll have American Lit, and you'll have Emerson and Whitman and all those other dead white guys. And then you'll have like a third area, and mine was in rhetoric and composition. Those things don't change a lot. The canon of the classics doesn't change a lot. And so the idea of a department changing dynamically, it's a little bit slower to think about that kind of change. But in this sort of discipline that's really about responding to student needs, we find ourselves each semester reviewing what went well this semester, what's not going so well, what do we want to change for next time, and it's much more dynamic than that. And so I pulled Patricia Cross as one of the gurus in developmental education. She says, research without practice is empty, and practice without research is blind. So you have to kind of be looking at both pieces of it. You have to be doing self-evaluation and reflection on your teaching, and in my case, on program development and enrollment management, and what are we doing as an entire university that might be creating these bottlenecks and roadblocks. And I'll show you an example of what that looks like to us sometimes. So it's evolved into, here at Out of State, a set of programs, and we decided to use the language of college readiness to really make it easier for students to understand what it is we're talking about, because developmental education means something to me, but it took me like 5 slides to try to explain it to you, and that's not really the best design, right? If I explain this is about helping you be ready for college, that also allows me to do outreach work with high school students. It allows me to do faculty-to-faculty conference talks, and we met with high school, middle school, Trinidad State faculty and Adams State faculty in April, and started having some dialogue among us about what does college readiness look like and what kinds of things could we all do to make that possible. And so hopefully it's a set of solutions. So I wanted to give you an image of what the graduating class from May of 2011 looked like. I had Linda Relier stand on the stage and take a picture out of the audience. There were 287 students who graduated that day. And then I had one of my fantastic program assistants run the transcripts of all of our students and discover how many of those students took a developmental course. And 88 of those 287 students would not have had the opportunity to graduate if we didn't have developmental education at Adams State, which is about 30% of 31% of our graduating class. And those faces that have a red dot over them, I want to tell you a little bit about what those faces look like. So this is a profile of the types of students who tend to be in my courses, okay? Adams State is a Hispanic serving institution. That means 25% or more of our student body is of Hispanic heritage. Within the state, and we currently are at 31%, about 31% of our student body is Hispanic, but in my program it's 54%. And of any ethnic minority, it's 70-some%. And of first generation, we have about 60% of the full population of Adams State. In my program, higher first generation. In my program, higher Pell eligibility, low income, and obviously a slightly lower composite ACT score. So if we were to exclude or defund developmental education at Adams State or elsewhere, and it is being defunded elsewhere in the state of Colorado and in the United States, this is the kind of students who lose the opportunity to go to college, and that's problematic. Okay, so some of the things that developmental education looks like here at Adams State. Our college readiness programs include things like STAY, the Structured Transitional Academic Year. This is our 4th year of offering STAY. STAY has a sheltered, differentiated instruction for students who have 2 or 3 low test scores in reading, writing, and math. They take all their math classes together, reading, English, and then they take a AAA class together. They may take other classes in addition to that. And we've seen some success with targeting resources to those students. In 2008, as a campus, we did a self-study to determine what our retention weaknesses were, and we were hemorrhaging students who had 2 or 3 developmental needs. So that was the first priority. Dr. Mumper asked me, put something together to support these students who have low test scores in 2 or 3 areas, and that's where the STAY program came out. High school outreach to pre-remediate students. There's nothing quite, one of the difficult things I do is talk to students who are good or think of themselves as being good at math, good at English. They've gotten A's. We've had valedictorians in my program, and they don't understand how they could be testing into developmental math when they've always gotten A's in math. They have gotten A's in math all through high school, and they're coming to me, and they don't understand. And so helping them understand the difference between getting A's and passing an achievement test or a placement test is part of the conversations that we have. And now what we're trying to do with some of our initiatives with the high schools is do better communication of what it means to be college ready. What kinds of skills specifically do you need in order to test into a college-level math course? We have summer bridge developmental courses with the Fast Track program, also offered with Student Support Services, their summer bridge programming as well, and we're looking at developing some things for summer 2013. We do something called intrusive advising, where we really do a case management model for students. We pay attention to choices not only that are academic, but we ask about financial aid and how they're planning on, if they filled out the FAFSA yet, have they registered for their next courses. We look at a lot of different pieces more as a case manager, which is very different work. I mean, none of us were trained, some of us are trained in social work, but this is a very different model from the way certainly a faculty advisor would approach or would traditionally have approached advising. We've had wonderful work with Debbie Hill, who runs our advising program, and doing some regular training with all of us to make sure that we understand more about intrusive advising. And we also have mentoring. We've, in fact, right now there's a bowling party going on of the mentors in the state program, people who are juniors and seniors who've successfully navigated their first couple years of college, mentoring students who are either freshmen in college, or we have a program with high school students as well, where they're mentoring and creating those relationships and talking about the real expectations for college. Because for first generation students, I want you to understand, where do you think they get information about what college is like?
From their high school friends?
If they have high school friends who are not first generation, they may, but the media, from TV or movies, and generally TV and movies show a stereotype. They show one of two stereotypes. They either show the party animal or the super nerd. And if they don't identify with either of them, then they don't really know how to behave in college. And what we've done with our mentoring programs is we take people who are real college students, who they're both, right? I mean, people know how to have fun, but they also know how to be at their 8 a.m. math class, and they know how to plan for an exam, and they get a role model who can show a little broader perspective than that kind of canned stereotype.
They're also victimized by for-profit colleges like University of Phoenix.
Yeah, well, that's true as well. So these are some of the things that we're doing at Adams State. And these are not all things that are in my purview, but they are all things that we do at Adams State related to college readiness, including things like tutoring programs, supplemental instruction, which is students taking a high-risk course, a course that is a fail-out course for a discipline, whether it's, for example, anatomy and physiology can be the course that makes or breaks whether or not you can get into the nursing program, the human performance physical education program. If there are a high number of D's, F's, and W's associated with that course, we can assign a tutor to attend that class and meet with students outside of class. That's called supplemental instruction, and we do that. And we have other kinds of programs here that are related to supporting college readiness. So how do students place into developmental education classes? We have them take a placement test called the AccuPlacer, and depending on their score, they may have to take the 100 level course is the course that they need to get college level credit. So they may need to take 2 or even 3 or 4 semesters before they can get into that college level course. And if I can, what I'm doing with my high school students right now in this pilot program is we took a placement test as high school juniors, and I'm asking them to set a goal. Maybe you tested into Math 095, but you want to test into Math 099 by the beginning of your freshman year of college. Having them kind of develop an awareness of, oh, I still have a year. I could do some of these extra activities. I could see if I can move myself more quickly through these programs. And accelerated learning is another part of developmental education we'll talk about in a little bit. This is some of what it looks like when we sit we have monthly stay meetings where we talk about what's working, what isn't working. We keep what works and we try something new to address what are newly discovered challenges. And I have to thank Kathy Heaton for the metaphor of a kitchen. It's not like we're trying to remodel a kitchen. It's not like we're that remedial idea where we just need to go in and fix that one thing. It's a constantly evolving and changing population of students, and it should be, right? The demographics of our country are changing. We still have a long way to go before we're graduating a diverse graduating class that looks exactly like the community in which our town resides. And So it's going to be a dynamic program. And so I wanted to share with you one of the ways we do that, which is we keep a Google Doc of issues that we encounter. And when we met right at the beginning of the school year, we noticed things like students are getting placed in the wrong place, or if they register for classes after August 17th at 5 p.m., they're still admitted to fall semester. If we could change the coding and banner, we could make it so that they're admitted for spring semester, because that's the intention. And we just kind of keep a list of what needs to be done, who takes that action, who's involved, and we can kind of keep track of the kinds of problems and challenges that we're encountering. Some of them well beyond the purview of our program here, but when we identify these systemic things and we can fix these pieces, we see dramatic improvements. An oversimplified version of these two perspectives of developmental education that just in the past 4 or 5 months have been debated about, and I referenced this earlier, there are a lot of acronyms, so I'm trying to make sure I spell them all out. The Community College Resource Center at Teachers College of Columbia University, and Columbia University is an Ivy League university, which generally is not admitting developmental education, a very different population of students. They came out with a study that basically says developmental education is bad for students because students who take developmental education courses are unlikely to graduate. Okay, so there's a causal problem there, kind of saying that it causes. You want to say something? Circular. It is circular, and another perspective on that is that students who place into developmental courses tend to have other factors which impact their success: poverty, systemic inequalities, first-generation status, underfunded school districts from which they got their K-12 education. But these are sort of the two debates, and some of the ways that we're confronting that I'm going to talk about next. In Colorado, some of our trends, there is the Colorado Commission on Higher Education Remedial Policy Review Task Force is meeting every month and every week now. We talk on the phone every Tuesday afternoon, and we're trying to look at some of the systemic challenges and what policies we can put in place that we can support students proceeding through the system, getting the skills that they need so that they can be successful. And it requires aligning our admissions policies with remedial policies, with high school concurrent enrollment policies, higher education academic requirements, which just went into effect about 2 or 3 years ago, requiring that students have 4 years of English, 4 years of math when they're in high school, things like that. Challenges with endorsed diplomas. There's one of the things that's being discussed is high schools giving regular diplomas and diplomas that have a seal of approval that this student is college ready, and what are some of the consequences that happen with that. And I'll give you some examples of how right now we don't differentiate between those things, and in some ways it would be illegal to, but I want to give you an example of a student that we've had 3.1 high school GPA, looked like would be a good student, a good candidate for success in college, but that student had a modified curriculum because of a disability. So that student didn't take the same kinds of math classes, had a modified curriculum for their K-12 experience, but that student is sitting in the same classroom trying to learn algebra with students who didn't have a modified curriculum, and we need to have some way of supporting. If we're going to admit them, we need to support them. Okay, and so either we have to change the way we're discerning which students are going to be successful in college, or increase the supports available to the students that we are enrolling. Conversations about career readiness and students being able to take different types of classes to satisfy a math requirement depending on which types of careers they may want to go into, which kinds of diplomas they may want. ICAP is another new unfunded mandate that's come to the K-12 system that has all of these career and college readiness milestones, and we're doing some things to map our readiness with readiness for that. And there's also discussions about something called P20, which stands for pre-K, all the way through 20th grade, which is PhD graduate school. How do we support and have articulated programs through all of our different systems to have student success with that? Supplemental academic instruction, accelerating is a model that we're discussing the policy for right now. What that would require is to allow students who just missed the cut score for getting into English 101 to take English 101 with like a tutoring attached or some other lab credit attached to it so that they can more quickly work through the system so that they can get their college level coursework with all those without as many semesters to wait to get through the system. And then using different types of technology. We have flipped classrooms is another model that people use. Flipped classrooms are where students are using some software program. We're doing this in math with the Emporium model for math, where students take a diagnostic test for which math skills they're lacking, and then they have an individualized learning plan for filling in all of the gaps. Because for some of our students, that's really what happened. Somewhere along the way, 3rd grade, they got the measles or something like that, and they missed fractions, and they've never gotten it since. And they get socially promoted through 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, but they really can't progress through algebra because they're missing that one thing. And so we give them this diagnostic test. They go step by step and they develop mastery in all of the skills so that they have foundation to move forward. And that's another model we're looking at. And then I want to show you a couple of examples from Texas, the Comprehensive Design for Developmental Education and Completion by Design. And these are those big picture models that I want to share. And I'm just repeating that statistic again of very few of our students are graduating college ready, and so we do need to have some partnership and communication across the road from higher education institutions and K-12 institutions. And so this is from a website called completionbydesign.org, and this is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has put this together. I know the font is really small, but I just want to point out that across the top we have different loss points. Where do we lose students? Well, either they do not apply to post-secondary education, they delay their entry to post-secondary, they have poor college counseling. Some of the high schools, even in the San Luis Valley, they don't even have a guidance counselor they don't have the resources to do college advising for these high school students, and so they might be missing out on some of these basic points, and that's where we're losing them. So we can lose them when they're at all of these different stages along the way. We talk about students progressing from applying to the college to entering to progressing through the course requirements to completing their course of study, and then the different momentum strategies along the way to support that. And again, that website's completionbydesign.org if you want to read that in more detail. This is what the Texas higher education system is looking at as a project model for their comprehensive model for developmental education. They want to have some common assessment tool or tools to evaluate their academic preparedness and other risk factors. And we've talked in our program meetings, we talk about a risk factor of motivational deficit. Some of our students suffer from a motivational deficit. How do I remediate that? How do I support that? Okay, so identifying what some of those other risk factors may be. 75%, 3/4 of college students today, and of developmental education college students today, are non-traditional students. They're raising families, they're working 20 or more hours a week. We don't have as many of the traditional 18-year-old whose full-time job, so to speak, is to be a full-time student in college. We have people who are trying to do everything. They're trying to raise their family, they're trying to support their family financially without taking out too much loans, and they're trying to take 16 or 19 credit hours. And how can we design the system to be a little bit more universally accessible to more than I mean, to 3/4 of the population, that they are the traditional students now. And then what that's going to map into, whether it's adult basic education programs, significant academic remediation, or just short-term refresher courses, or being able to test directly into the college level course. Then conversations about instructional delivery and faculty development, the student support services to meet the needs in their multiple domains, and this would include bridging the gap between the academic side of our institutions and the student affairs side of our institutions, which we tend to have sort of a rigid wall between those two, but there are certainly relationships that could be pursued and developed. And then a feedback loop so that we can do self-assessment and continuous improvement. And these are some of the models that I think we're moving in that direction. And certainly here at Adams State, we do some of these things. So the big picture, it'd be great if we could align our admission policy with our remediation policy and create pathways for career readiness for all people. And this is very different from sort of a traditional model of higher education. And as has been referenced earlier, when you have, well, let me put it this way. We've talked about courses being weed out courses, right? How do we get the kids out of here who aren't college material? And I'm proposing a different paradigm. What if there were 100 babies born in any given year, and 18 years or how many years later, we had 100 different, as many pathways as we need to, so each of those 100 people has meaningful, dignified, family-supporting, salaried career path that has flexibility and the ability to navigate through different career paths. If you want to stop out or come back in, general pathways back into higher education or whatever kinds of certifications or other training, that's a very different model. It's more of all of us get to win rather than just the people who can make it through those weed out courses. I know this is very small font, but one of the things that we're trying to balance here, we've discussed as being the rock and the hard place. On the left-hand side, these were some of the numbers that Carla Hardesty and I looked at. We did some evaluation of the people who've been in the STAY program for the past couple of years and some of the statistics campus-wide, and we found that 25% of Adams State students were on probation or suspension. 1 out of 4 students were having lower than 2.0 GPA, and then they were getting into financial aid, probation, and suspension. They couldn't enroll in their next classes, and they were having this destabilizing force of, well, you just have to stay away from a semester. We weren't telling them you have to go and take courses elsewhere. We're just saying, like punishing students, you can't come to college here. We don't care what you do, but we kind of don't want you to come back. 11% of our students, we had a student loan default rate of 11%. It's actually a little bit higher now. So that means people are borrowing money, sometimes accruing tens of thousands of dollars, and now they don't even have a credential or anything better to show for it, and they have to pay that money back. They can't declare bankruptcy on student loan debt. Low success rates, and we identified that below a certain test score, we were seeing a 0% success rate. And so we had conversations with admissions about we need to look at having a floor. And I'm not saying we never admit those students, but we need to make sure that if there's a student who doesn't have a basic level of this skill, we don't have the resources to support that student's success, so we really ought not to be admitting that student unless we want to spend more to support that student. And then the hard place is related to our mission. I mean, we are a Hispanic serving institution. We ought to have quote unquote open admission. We don't have open admission. We do get about 1,100 applications and only accept about 700 or 800. I mean, there are many students who are turned away from admission to Adams State. But we do have this idea, and we were founded as a regional rural education provider. And if that slide I showed you earlier about turning away Hispanic students, students from low-income backgrounds, if we start turning away too many of our students that are our students, our Valley students, that's a problem. We need to balance that. And I'm not just talking about Hispanic populations. I think it's not only our mission to protect Hispanic students, but all underrepresented student populations, including first generation, students from low socioeconomic backgrounds, students from other underrepresented ethnicities, students whose first language is other than English, students from other countries, students with disabilities, non-traditional age students, students who have children and other vulnerable populations. And the last thing that I would put on this side is that we know that there is bias in standardized tests. The ACT is correlated with your family of origin's income. That's what ACT tells us. So if you have a high ACT score, it tells us your family had resources. That is not, we also know that there are cultural biases and language biases in the assessments that we use. And so we really have to get this balance just right. We don't want to eliminate support programs, but we should be equitable stewards of our resources. So some of the promising practices I've talked about a little bit already. And some of the new language that we use here, FGS, first generation college students, up until 2 years ago, we didn't even keep track of that data. We got a grant a few years ago from the Institute for Higher Ed Policy. We had to work with IR to figure out what the baseline number was of students that we were supporting who were first generation college students. And now just about everybody around here knows, oh yeah, I know what FGS stands for. Yeah.
Is that determined by self-reporting from our students?
It's determined by their FAFSA when they apply for financial aid. And that was part of it, is that Banner doesn't talk to the financial aid system, so we had to figure out a way to kind of map over that data so that we could use that information. These last couple bullets, I think we have better, or I'm striving towards better communication within our community, sharing resources and data with our high school, our middle school, and Trinidad State Junior College. And then I think we're also striving to have better internal communication among enrollment management, records, admissions, faculty, advising, transfer coordinator, suspension, probation, readmission, and institutional reporting. I just want to give you an example. Today, the records office faculty submitted our at risk of failing midterm grades. If you had a student who is getting a D or an F, today was the deadline to report that list of names. We never did anything with that list. Records would keep that, and then we never did anything with that. And so just a few years ago, 2-3 years ago, we talked with the registrar and said, hey, could you give the tutoring center that list, and we could go contact those students and kind of hunt them down. And if a student's at risk of failing all 4 or 5 of his or her classes, why don't we reach out to that student, bring them into the counseling center, and see if there's some systemic problem that we could challenge. So just better communication about some of these things, and we certainly have much more that we can do. I have a bibliography I'm happy to share about this, and I just want to share my last image here is the students in this digital storytelling class and how they're filming their progress towards college readiness. Thank you.
Thank you.